you doing? Proximity Conference. This is Pastor Jonathan Brookes from Chicago, Illinois, the West Englewood neighborhood on the south side of the city. I am the senior pastor of Canaan Community Church. I've been the pastor there for the last 14 years, also the author of the book, Church Forsaken, Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods. So glad to be with you. I just want to share a few thoughts I have about what it means to actually practice presence. Whether a neighborhood is neglected by the city, has been neglected by church, has been neglected by society as a whole, or has been neglected because people don't think that there are issues there and therefore think that people have everything under control, or an amount of wealth gives them this false idea that there's no needs there. The truth is that every place is both broken and beautiful. Every place has beautiful things and has things that need to be worked on. And in some way, every place is neglected. And so as we continue to talk about this, you'll understand that that is my heart and what I'm trying to portray here. I'll be coming from Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 4 through 7, with a little background on Jeremiah 29 and how it weaves in my story. As a person who lives on the south side of Chicago, I started to believe, just like Israel did about exile, that this was not a good place to be, and escapism and getting away became the narrative in which led my life. But what I've learned through this passage and through the last 20 years of living in my neighborhood with different eyes versus the ones I grew up with, is that what really happens here is that the deeper we move, the deeper we root ourselves in our place, the more we become God's tangible representatives in that place, and the more that place actually begins to benefit us. And so I want to share a letter that I've written. What I love about Jeremiah 29 is that it's a letter that Jeremiah writes to Israel while they're in exile, while they want comfort and to get back to the land of comfort. They want to get back to where everything was the way they understood it. What Jeremiah tells them is, no, God has other plans for you. And so what I want to do is I want to read a letter that I've written to many people just like you, called A Letter to My Fellow Exiles, and take a little time just to share with you what I think God has given me during this time. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and also be sharing some slides during the time. And I just hope that, as this is shared, that it'll be an opportunity for us to engage not only with the community where I come from, but also for you to maybe re-engage with where God has placed you. All right. So this is it, a letter to my fellow exiles. So in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 4 through 7, one of the first things that is told to Israel in Jeremiah 29:4 is this. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those whom I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Now, a member of my community once told me that there are only two kinds of people who live here: people who have nowhere else to go and people who have no other place they'd rather be. And that made a lot of sense to me, considering everybody who was in my neighborhood still was there, mostly because they were talking about the good old days, and most people who have been successful had left, never to return. But the truth is, when I write to you today, I don't write as someone who's scared of where they live and doesn't want to be there. I write to you as someone who's fallen into both categories. Once a young man itching to get as far away from the south side of Chicago as I possibly could, to now I'm a grown man who loves my neighborhood passionately and really couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Jeremiah wrote a letter to Israel encouraging them to trust God even while being exiled to a place that they would have never chosen. And so I say to you, many of you may be defining your worth in the same way. Maybe you are defining it the same way I did, in escapism versus investment. Success hinges on upward mobility and getting out of the place where you feel exiled. But I want to give you the same message that God gave Israel. And that was not to escape and run away, but it was to build houses and live in them. I mean, surprisingly, Jeremiah actually begins his letter in the exact opposite way than most people would expect. He's encouraging the exiles to build houses and live in them, encouraging them not to abandon the place in which God had sent them. And I encourage the same for each of us, even if we find ourselves in a place where we would have not have chosen it, or if the expectation of God is different than what we may have thought. The expectation of God for Israel was to make themselves at home. Now it's crazy. When I moved my family, my wife, and my two daughters back into the community I grew up in, which is Inglewood on the south side of Chicago, I had the assumption that God wanted me to transform this neighborhood. However, I quickly learned that the biggest transformation was actually happening in me and my family. So, when I moved my family back into the neighborhood, this was the house that we moved into, that house that you see in the center. And it was amazing. I had to try to convince my wife because she wasn't as much of a fan of moving to the neighborhood as I was. She didn't grow up in Inglewood. She didn't have the background that I did. And so I remember when we were living in a smaller apartment over east on the east side of the city, I came up to her. She was pregnant with our second daughter. And I was just caressing her stomach and I said, hey, I really feel like God is calling me to move back to Inglewood. And I whispered in her ear, and I expected her to be just so excited. And she turned to me and looked me right in my eye and said, "That's good. When are you moving?" And I said, wait a minute. I was hoping that you would come and maybe bring our babies with you, you know." Um, but I knew that it was going to take a little more than the little Christian euphemism of like, oh, God was telling me to make this happen. And so what I did was went on search for a home in Inglewood where I felt like we could at maybe an affordable price, make a home for our two daughters, not just have a small apartment. And so that was the house I found, and it was crazy because we both had this mindset of if we're going to move into this neighborhood, there were certain rules and regulations and ways that we had to live to be there. So, we made a decision. My wife was like, I don't want the kids playing out front with the kids from the block. I don't know these kids. I don't know their parents. I don't know their upbringing. So I really don't want that. And I'm like, no problem. I'm fine with that. I get it. And I'm like, don't worry. I understand how to live in the inner city, right? So I'm like, when we move in, don't worry. We're going to move in the middle of the night. We'll wrap our flat screen TVs and blankets, and nobody will know when we tiptoe in. And we'll put a little lamp in our bay window in the front and put it on a timer so no one knows when we're home and when we're not. We'll only enter through the back door. We won't even mess with the front. That way we can keep our privacy. We don't have to worry about people bothering us. We had it down pat how to live in a way that was like a fortress. Well, one day, coming home from Bible study one evening, we get out our garage and we're walking into the back door like we normally do, and we hear shots ring out. Pow, 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 gunshots. And I am so afraid. It sounds like they're right next to me. I'm telling my wife, get down. I'm telling my daughters, get down. And we get into the house, and I can see as I look out the front bay window that whatever's happened right somewhere by my house because the lights and sirens from the police car and the ambulance, all that are right in front of my window. So I tell Michelle, hey, you stay here. I got to go check this out. And I'm walking to the front like, God, all right, now you told me to move here, but I don't know about this. And so I'll go to the front and I'll peer out that bay window over the lamp, and I recognize that the shooting happened right next door to me at the house that was to the left in the picture. And I'm thinking, okay, God, this is crazy. What's going on? So I go outside because I need to find out what's happening. And when I get on my porch, I look left and I look right, and I make the decision to go to my left because the lady's house on that side looks just like mine. And she's an older lady. She seemed like, the person I would want to talk to. And the shooting happened at the other house, so I don't want to go there. So I walk down the steps and I see her and I say, "Excuse me." She's like, "Yeah, hey, how you doing, baby?" And I'm like, I'm good. I just wanted to know, did you hear that? Is everything okay? She's like, "I heard it." And I was worried myself. And I'm just wondering if everybody's okay. And I'm like, "Yeah, we're fine. You guys fine." And then she goes, and I'm like, "What?" She said, "Oh my God, it's Wednesday, around 7. Oh God, so it's Wednesday. You guys must have just been coming in the house because I know Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday you teach school. You pick up your daughters from their daycare and from school, and you get home maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock. But on Wednesdays you have Bible study, and so I know that you was at Bible. So you must have been just at the door. Oh my God, how are Jasmine? How are Jade? Is Michelle okay?" And I'm like, yes, thanks for your concern. And you are? Like, I never spoken to this lady once. She knew our whole schedule, my kid's name, my wife's name, what time we get home. It was crazy. And so I just kind of dismissed it because I'm still trying to find out what's going on. And I'm like, is this normal? Does this type of thing happen a lot? And she's like, no, this is not the type of block we live on. We don't see this stuff happen. Everybody is close knit. And I'm like, okay. She's like, as a matter of fact, why don't you go ask, like, those guys over there what happened? Now, let me paint this picture again in case you forgot the image. The house on that side, not quite the same as me and Miss Barbara's house, right? Like there's no grass in the front. The porch leaned a little bit. It's also like 9 or 10 guys on the porch playing cards and dominoes every night, and just a little different. And I'm like, you want me to go ask them? She was like, they fine, baby, go ask. So I make my way across the yard and I go ask, hey, excuse me, is everybody all right over here? And one guy's mad. He turned around. What? Oh, excuse me. Hey, Pastor, man, my bad. And I'm like, how does this guy know I'm a pastor too? So anyway, I just asked, hey, is everybody okay? They're like, yeah, everybody's fine. Only one person got grazed in the leg. He in the ambulance. They're taking care of him. And this type of thing don't happen, Pastor J, so don't worry about it. And I'm like, it's easy to say. I'm like, is this something I should be worried about? And they're like, no, don't worry, we got this. This is our block. We were just playing cards. I think it may have been a mistake because some guys came across the vacant lot from across the street and just started spraying the house. And we don't know why. We don't bother anybody. And I'm like, okay. And they said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. That's when my antennas went up. Y'all gonna take care of it. So can you do me a favor and be just a little more specific about what you mean by take care of it? And they're like, no, it ain't nothing crazy like that, Pastor J. We take care of this block. This our block. And somebody from behind him yells at him, hey man, tell him about the car. And I'm like, okay. And so the guy, I'll give you an example. So it was a guy who would drive up and down our block super fast, driving way faster than the speed limit. And this is a residential area. Kids are jumping rope, playing ball, right? And we telling him from the porch, we screaming, hey man, you better slow down. Don't be driving fast on our street like that. And I'm like, well, what happened? And they're like, well, he just kept doing it. Matter of fact, he would yell at us out the car and then drive and do it on purpose. But we caught him. I'm like, oh, you caught him? I'm like, yeah, we caught him. So at the stop sign right before he got here, one of us just walked up to him and was like, look, man, you're going to have to slow down coming down our block driving like that. This is a residential area. We take care of our kids. We ain't going to have that. But because it was only one person, the guy got tough. And he got out the car. Man, if you don't get out the way, I'll run you over. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So what happened then? They're like, oh, it's easy. We all jumped out. We came jumping over gates, running out the gangways. He tried to drive off. So we started rocking his car back and forth. I'm like, what? What happened then? It's like, we flipped it over. I was like, oh, okay. That's not how I would have handled this situation. But I tell you what, I have never felt more safe in my life. Michelle, bring them babies out here and meet our new neighbors. This is bring them girls out here now. I'm like, this is Miss Barbara. She's been living here almost her whole life. She knows our whole schedule. She knows your name, what school you go to, what time we get home. So she's good. Don't worry about it. These people over here, this is twin and his friends. They've been watching our house. They know everything that's going on. And I ain't never felt more safe than anything. So you don't have to play in the backyard no more. You come out here and play in the front. Well, these fine gentlemen can keep their eyes on you. And Miss Barbara, who been watching you anyway, can know exactly what's going on. It was in that moment that I recognized that we were building a fortress. Like, we got to build the house part, but we didn't get to live in it part. And that's what I think God wants us to recognize. It's not just to build houses, but it's to live in them. It was in a moment when I needed my neighbors, when I found out that my neighbors were actually already loving me while I was trying to build myself up as a fortress. So proximity changed everything. It wasn't just about living next door. It was about moving into each other's lives. And this is what he's saying when Jeremiah commands us to build houses and live in them. You know what I mean? And I learned really quickly, even in my neighborhood, which is majority African American, not a lot of racial diversity, that there was a ton of diversity in the way we lived and the way we thought about the world. And my neighbors taught me in the midst of that, that unity can only happen in diversity. And that unity without diversity was actually uniformity. So it wasn't until I got closer to my neighbors that I really found out who I was. And it was clear that God's command was to become a part of exile, not to try to turn exile into my own version of Jerusalem. We often seek comfort, but God tells us don't seek comfort, build houses and live in them where I have placed you, and then allow that place to begin to transform you. Now, after that lesson, I began to really invest in my neighborhood, and I began to see Inglewood in a different way, the same way I think that Israel may have begun to see Babylon in a different way once they actually started to build houses or live in them. But then, like Jeremiah goes on to tell them to plant gardens and eat what they produce. Now, this was interesting, My community, comprising of approximately 60 square miles, not only lacked healthy food options, but also had 0 sit-down restaurants. So I soon realized in order to actually plant gardens in my neighborhood, I would have to do some things different. You know, what you see on the screen is what we typically have, these corner stores with unhealthy food, like flaming hot Cheetos that they would put a ground meat on top of and nacho cheese on them and little juices that actually have no juice in them. They'd be like food coloring, water and acid, I feel like, and a ton of sugar, right? So how do you eat what's produced in your neighborhood when what's produced in your neighborhood can kill you? This meant rather than eating only what was produced, I had to become a planter, and thus we started planting our own gardens. I started to find out that people were actually already planting gardens in my neighborhood in a place that was narrated as a food desert or a place where you couldn't find healthy food. And so we pulled our resources together at Canaan with our neighbors and with our congregation, and we began to have what's called a healthy food cooperative that met in the basement of our church. So we would bring healthy food options from our gardens, from stores, from different places, and we would shop for them down in the basement of our church because we recognized that we had to plant gardens and eat what they produce. But it didn't stop there. After we planted gardens, we also got a group of residents together who said, if we can have our own food cooperative, why can't we have a sit-down restaurant? And so we opened the Kusanya Cafe, which is now a not-for-profit coffee shop in a community whose purpose is to serve as a gathering space with healthy food options in our neighborhood. So our church, our community, our residents, all of us work together to provide a place where we can plant gardens and eat what they produce. And what happens is people get excited about those type of things. Initiatives like this eventually led to the opening of the first full-scale organic grocery store in our neighborhood in decades. Now, when Whole Foods initially moved in our neighborhood, people assumed we were being gentrified. But the truth is that they didn't know that leaders and residents of the community, religious leaders like myself, community leaders, others were already getting together, have been planting gardens, and were well aware of Whole Foods entering our community. So much so that we had dozens of community meetings where we planned the floor plan, the decor. We chose local vendors' products to be sold. We did all types of things for community engagement, including deciding on their personnel and staff. And when it opened, the beautiful thing is it opened in September of 2017. It opened in Grand Inglewood style with a barbecue in the parking lot with all of us dancing to music and our grills and all of the local vendors giving out free samples of their food. This was an amazing moment where we recognized what planting gardens actually meant in our community. Now, don't get me wrong, none of this happened because of Canaan Community Church, my little small church on the corner in Inglewood. But none of this happened without Canaan Community Church either, and that is the key. When we begin to plant gardens and eat what they produce, we recognize that we are not the ones who make things happen. We join in with the residents and their inbred power and capabilities and empower one another to meet each other's needs. So now we have to figure out where we fit as a church, right? Maybe we can't build a Whole Foods by ourselves, but what we can do is make sure that when people buy food from places like Whole Foods, they know how to cook it. They know what to do with it. And so we started having Cooking Matters classes at our church where people learn how to cook healthy on a budget, right? This is what it means to plant gardens, to eat what they produce, to not only be people who are consumers in our places, but to also be producers. Now, the next thing that Jeremiah points out in this letter is that you have to marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they might have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease, right? Now, as we talk about this, if I'm honest, this part of Jeremiah's letter actually troubled me, y'all, because he was talking about my daughters, right? I was with Jeremiah all the way up to the point to where he started talking about my daughters. I said, God, have you seen the choices out here? Have you seen the people you asking me to give my daughters to when you say marry your daughters off in exile? And so I cried to my wife about how unfair this was. And she smiled and reminded me in her own special way. She said, Jonathan, please remember that you are from Inglewood. And it was such an epiphany for me. What was I thinking? Oh yeah, just 10 years earlier, I was the same young person standing on the corner in front of a liquor store. And I'm sure her dad was like, really, God, this is what you're gonna present to me and for my daughter? But the same God who was working in my life and causing me to be the man that I am today is the same one working on the young men I see in my neighborhood and the young ladies I see in my neighborhood. Plus, I realized if I wanted to see change in my neighborhood, then maybe I needed to get out of my window talking about these young people and get on the corner talking to them. You know, I mean, the truth is, I want my daughters to find a great partner somewhere along the life, if that's what they want to do. So I need to be investing in some of the young people in my neighborhood because I live here and I plan to increase here generationally. We have a vested interest in the young people. This young man here is a young man who's been a part of our after-school programs at our church for many, many years, named Tommy. And just recently, Tommy got not only his bachelor's degree, but his master's degree from Southern Illinois here as the first college graduate in his family. And his whole life trajectory has changed because he invested in himself and we had the opportunity to invest in him. This has been a blessing to me and my family as well. It's not just about Tommy doing well and changing his family's trajectory, but it's also saying that I will invest in the young people in my neighborhood so that there are people who I would be willing to say, yes, I'll give them to my daughters if that was the case. Y'all, once I understood what God was telling us through Jeremiah, the next verse made perfect sense. It says, also seek the peace and welfare or the prosperity of the city where I carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. It made perfect sense. We need to care about exile because when exile does well, we also do well because we live here. Once my family got to know our neighbors and decided to make ourselves at home, we actually felt safer. Once our congregation helped to start the co-ops and cafes and gardens and grocery stores, we are the ones who have the opportunity to receive healthy food options. You know, now that I recognize my responsibility to the young people in my community, I benefit from their creativity, their joy, and hopefulness. In exile, God is teaching us that our future is intimately tied to those around us. Y'all, when one suffers, we all suffer. When one prospers, we all prosper. The enemy wants us to believe that all of this is just about us and not we. These billboards that you see on the screen are from a campaign we did in our neighborhood called the Englewood Rising Campaign. And what we wanted to show are all of the amazing people in our community who are doing amazing things, who are an image of the beauty of our community, not just the brokenness. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a picture of me on a billboard exactly 20 years later from when I was running out of the neighborhood trying to get away as far as possible. I woke up on that morning to a text message from a young lady in my neighborhood saying, "What a great birthday gift to see your face on a billboard representing our neighborhood." And I thought to myself, not only have I invested in Rudy here, but this place is making my life better. I'm on a billboard because of my intentional connection to this neighborhood that I thought was a place of exile. Y'all, we have got to believe God when he says, seek the peace and welfare, because in its welfare, you will find your welfare. And this right here became the key to me. It helped me to understand exactly what God was looking for me. And so I say to each and every one of y'all as I begin to close, this letter puts at the center of our concerns where God is leading us, which means to you, my fellow exiles, there are no God-forsaken places, just church-forsaken places. God has commanded us to love all places and all people, especially those who have been forsaken by society. Therefore, I want to close my letter with a challenge to each of you. I want to ask you some questions. Will you stop only asking God what you are called to do and maybe begin asking God where you are called to be? Could you stop asking what you can do to change the world and maybe start asking where in the world you might be changed the most? Stop asking what will make the biggest impact and start asking where the biggest impact could be made on you. Stop asking what is the most comfortable fit for you in ministry and start asking where you can live to maybe be a little more uncomfortable. For nowhere in Scripture has God ever called us to be comfortable. Lastly, as I close this letter, my fellow exiles, wherever God places you, will you stop only asking God what you must do to be successful and start asking where you must go to become more faithful to the kingdom of God? For God never told us to be successful. God has only asked us to be faithful. So my last question to each of you, is, can you be faithful even if the only thing changing around you is you? Signing off, grace and peace, Pastor Jonathan Brookes, your fellow exile. Y'all, this letter is just a reminder that God has a plan for us, and where God places us in proximity is where God expects us to live out and root ourselves deeply. I just want to let you know, if you get an opportunity, not only do I have the book Church Forsaken, Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods, but I also have a free online curriculum that you can download, do small group discussions with, that can be found at www.walkingtowardslove.com. That's www.walkingtowardslove.com. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you. And I just want to pray for you as we leave out. God, I thank you for each person participating in this proximity conference. And I ask, God, that you would help us to recognize that you have not called us to be people of comfort, but you've called us to be people who are comforted by you and your plan for our life. May we root deeper. May we go more approximate to one another. And may we remember to seek the peace and welfare of the city where you have called us into exile. Pray to you on its behalf, for in its welfare, we will find our welfare. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless.